Kathy bought that farm that was not good for, it was too dry and the crop wasn't good, but we lived up there and I got sick and went to a house hospital. Did I ever tell you that story?
No, no.
I'm getting off from that first year, that teaching, but we'll get back to that. We were up north, and I kept going to college wherever I could to get classes.
So when you say up north, where were
Up
you?
by Staples,
Okay, all right.
and Bertha,
Yeah.
and those towns right on it. And I got sick.
So you went up north because that was where Chris's,
Farm, Dad bought the farm.
I thought Chris was from Bryceland.
Yeah, but his dad sold the farm with all the crop, and there he was with nothing to do. So he bought a farm up north. It was a beautiful house and stuff, but
Okay.
not good farming.
All right.
They had all the beans
So this was after you and Chris had
married.
married. They sold that farm, moved up north.
Yeah,
And
and
then-
then he bought a farm with somebody. It was a big mistake.
Okay.
All of it was very sad. But anyway, Orvin was there. And he and Chris actually drove some of the machinery from down below up there to that farm.
Hmm.
But I got really sick. I'd been sick down at, and that when I taught country school, real sick, and I went to Doc Hanson. He said, just go to bed with a hot water bottle for a couple days. So that's what I did. But I got up there and I got really painfully sick. It must have been the third time. So I said to Orvin, don't mind me kind of moaning a little bit. I said, I just got to bed. So then Chris came in and we didn't have a doctor. Nobody.
Mhm.
So we said, maybe we better go to the doctor. And they had one in Bertha and they had a house hospital.
I don't know what that is.
A house, and it was a hospital.
Okay.
And it had bedrooms and the little room where he operated. So I was in terrible pain. I'd had this before down in down in southern Minnesota, Iowa there where we lived. So we went into that place and there was a nurse in there. And she said, the doctor's out and he'll be back in. And he came in about 9 o'clock and he came to, and then the pain subsided because those cysts had ruptured.
Hmm.
So he came to touch me and he said, oh, you can't touch me. I said, I just don't feel like that would be comfortable. And so he went out to Chris and he said, I'm going to have to open it because there's something really wrong. So I was in this bed and the nurse put me in this clothes and she and I walked to the operating room, got up on the table.
Which was the old kitchen?
I don't know what it was. And I can remember like yesterday. And they gave me ether.
Yeah.
And I fought it. I said, you know how, because it was so awful. So he said, just open your mouth and pant like a dog. I don't know what he said, or count for me. And I went under. And when I woke up, I was in the bed. And I had all this bandages. So I thought, oh, it's over. And I had this long hair and throwing up, because you get so sick from ether. Threw up, it just awful. And, but when he opened me, he said that I had cysts as big as goose eggs that had ruptured more than once. But they didn't take all my uterus, because they thought that would make me go the chain. I don't know why.
Mhm, mhm.
Anyway, so we were up there, and then as soon as I was taking college classes somewhere,
You must have had endometriosis.
I suppose. I
I
don't know.
bet you anything that's what it was.
So then I kept going to classes, and I was in college classes when I got sick. But she said, now, it was an off-campus thing. She said, when you get better, you can come to St. Cloud and finish those classes. And I did, and I was really, really thin. I was 103 pounds, I think, when I got through that.
Hmm.
But I finished those classes. So I took classes wherever I could.
Yeah.
And I got over. I remember I stopped at your mom and dad's house, and it was real cold and stuff. And I was having hot flashes. Norma said, "Do you have anything?" I said, "No." She said, "You got to get on something because I kept having hot flashes, you know, it's below zero, I'm just, oh, it was terrible, just terrible. So I gotta tell you this, I met that president of that country school that had me sign the paper if I ever got, so I said, it's your fault, I never did get pregnant. He came to California to see me. I told him that he died of a heart attack. But anyway, that was one thing there. So then
I did a lot of locum work up in Little Falls.
A lot of what?
When I was working in Redwood, I would take vacation days and go work in other hospitals
Oh,
to make more money. And one of the places that I was in Minnesota that I was doing a lot of work was Little Falls.
okay.
So that same part of the world.
There was Bertha and Hewitt and Staples. You remember all those
Mhm,
places?
yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Pretty up there. Pretty country.
Yeah, so,
So Chris had farmland up there.
yeah, we had a farm with a beautiful house on it.
Must have been a gorgeous farm, even if you couldn't farm it. It
But
must
you
be-
couldn't farm it because there were stones.
Right.
And it got dry and the wind came and it cut all the soybeans off.
No,
I mean,
it-
you could only make a little money if you had dairy cows. And
Yeah.
we didn't.
no.
So we left that. Then I went back to teach. And I left that school because another
It's
school.
amazing you survived the surgery.
He said I was full of blood. And then when I went home,
But
back to
just because of, I mean, I don't know what his
Was-
qualifications were, but I'm sure
a doctor and that woman. And then,
how you didn't get infection or, I
And
mean, there's
then
so many
he's-
things that go wrong.
I said, then I laid at home and I could smell that ether forever. I couldn't eat.
Yeah.
I could wake up and smell that ether, smell that ether. So I said, I bet I have cancer. So I said to him, do I have cancer? And he took hold of my shoulder. He said, no, my dear, you would have been dead long ago if you'd had cancer. And then there was the polio epidemic. Polio, and people were dying. So, and then my sister-in-law came up and her mother, Mildred and Minda. Minda was the one, and that drove me crazy. And I finally went back, and then when I was in that country school, the next country school called me and said, we don't like our teacher. We'd like for you to come and teach, and she could go to your school. We'll just change. Can you imagine? So I went to the other country school, and then I taught there 3 years. And that was a pretty big country school, but no problems really like this other one. Not as big and I taught there 3 years, and then that country school closed, and I went to Drake and taught 2 years. So it was 11 years. Yeah, 11 years there and 31 in California. So that was 42 years. All nights and summers going to school. Anyway, I had a good time at that school, and I still correspond with 4 sisters I taught. Every year, I just had dinner with them, lunch with them in Lake Mills. One of them was slow. One girl was slow, but they all married, and I hear from them every holiday and everything.
Wow.
And then in town, that was another thing, going to that town where they had that superintendent. But I had a good class. I had 21 kids, 15 boys and 6 girls, and I think most of them were actually gifted. They were so bright. And that was the time, I'm getting off the story again, but that was the time that there was no dancing.
Yeah.
And I found some square dance records, and I said to the kid, and they looked easy. We're studying the Westward Movement. I said, I'm going to teach you square dancing. The kids went home all excited. She's going to teach square. Next morning, come into school, superintendent standing there. He said, what's this I hear you're going to teach dancing? I said, no, folk dancing. He said, no, you're not. You see what my life has been just one thing after. Very different.
Yeah.
So then we went to California because the farming, Chris was farming for this crazy lady. He had a beautiful farm, but she was really had mental problems. She'd come up, one day he'd come up there and she'd meet him, maybe even have a gun and said, no, I don't want you crossing, going on the yard. I mean, she was, and then the next day she'd say, I want to give you a rooster today or something. She was mentally ill. She and her husband lived together. They had about 8 children and a very stormy relation. So finally we'd give up farming because it was so stressful.
Yeah.
And he was a real good farmer. And then we came to California. And that's another
And the
story.
rest is history.
Yeah, and when I went to interview, I got to tell you this, in Torrance, which was a very booming all-American city. And it's still...
You'd been straight country school up to this point, right?
And Rake 2 years in that village.
So Rake had more of a regular
Individual classes.
school. Okay.
So I went there and we stayed 1 week with Chris's cousin, which was not good, and I said, we have to get out of here. So we found a place it was called the LA Strip. It was kind of an area between towns, they called it, and we rented an apartment that was all furnished. But I went for of course I didn't know how to drive in the city, so his cousin drove me for an interview. I go in, and I had some papers, and they looked at them, and I only had 2 years college. I graduated from Mason City and an AA. He said, what makes you think you could teach here, Betty, without a degree? I said, because I know somebody who is teaching there. Arlene had a friend that taught in that school district. I said, because I know somebody who does. That guy looked at, and he was from Iowa, Morton. So he saw some spunk in me, I suppose. And he said, I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation. You're teaching, you've got this room of kids, and they had a lot of children in their school. They were really overcrowded and they were desperate for teachers. He said, you're up there teaching, and this kid in the back starts acting up, what would you do? I said, I'd march right back there, tap him on the shoulder, and I said, you just knock this off. I'm teaching, we've got something to do. He said, don't touch him. I can remember like yesterday. Don't touch him. And he